Chapter 33. Come sit down. Steve led everyone into the living room and waited while Jade sat on the couch, Karen taking a seat in the recliner. Want anything to drink? Water please, said Karen. Can I have a shot of whiskey? Jade looked up at him, a hopeful look in her eye. Steve looked to Karen for her opinion. With most patients I wouldn't recommend it, she looked at Jade when she spoke, not him. But considering our metabolism and how much alcohol it takes to affect us, a shot or two wouldn't hurt. It might help you relax enough to get started. Steve got the drinks, bringing a bottle of Johnny Walker, a shot glass and an extra glass of water for Jade. He gave the Amine her glass, then sat beside Jade on the sofa. Jade scooted to the edge of the sofa and filled the shot glass. He watched as she closed her eyes and tipped the glass back, drinking it all in one large swallow. She refilled the tiny glass and downed the second shot with ease. Shaking her head, she put the bottle back on the coffee table and leaned back. He lifted his arm and waited while she scooted against him, then wrapped his arm around her. I don't know where to start, Jade said. Start wherever you like. Karen pulled a small notebook from her bag and leaned back in the chair, getting comfortable. Jade was quiet for several moments and Steve didn't know if she was going to be able to do it. Then she spoke. I've known Steve for as long as I can remember. At first he was my brother's best friend. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I felt it. Steve looked down at her, surprised she'd chosen to start with him, but stayed quiet. He didn't care where she started, as long as she got through it all. She told Karen about when he'd come home after being discharged from the military, and stayed less than 2 weeks before he left again. It made his heart ache all over again, even knowing he had done the right thing. She explained how it had hurt her, and how she'd turned the hurt to anger. I knew I couldn't just sit in the little town we grew up in and wait for him, Jade said. My parents wanted me to find a boy and get married. The idea held no appeal to me. The only person I could think about was him. She turned and looked up at him. No one else measured up. So I pushed to go to school instead. She talked about her life at school. She'd gone to class and studied, met some people but hadn't been close to anyone, not even the girls she'd shared a house with. It was the Friday before the holiday, Labor Day. I had a late class. My roommates were already gone for the weekend when I left for class. I wasn't planning to go home. Mom would have nagged me to get married and start a family, and I didn't want to hear it. She was quiet for a moment before continuing. She told the rest of her story much the same way she had the night before, pausing now and then to compose herself. Steve held her and stroked her arm, soothing her when her voice clogged with tears or went distant. She picked up his other hand from his lap and wove her fingers into his, holding tight as she talked. When she'd told her entire story, she turned in her seat and hid her face against his shoulder. Karen waited several minutes, then spoke, her voice soft and reassuring. JV, talking about it is good. By holding it in, you're letting him hold on to the part of you he took. She watched Jade as if looking for any reaction. Steve told me he's dead. He can't hurt you again, and he can't do it to anyone else. Jade looked at Karen, not quite meeting her eyes. That's right. He's dead. There's no more reason to be afraid of him. I know that here, Jade touched the side of her head, then laid the same hand against her chest. This is harder to convince. I know. It will take a while, but opening up, telling Steve and myself is a good start. When he called this morning, Steve said you had some residual effects after the attack. Can you tell me about them? He did something to me. I don't know what, but it kept me from being able to shift. Not just during the attack, but later too. It was weeks before I could shift again. For a while, I was afraid I might never get to be my cat again. Steve's heart ached. He didn't know how he might handle it if it had been him looking at the possibility of never shifting again. That she'd gone through it alone made him angry, but he pushed his anger away. It wouldn't help her now. "I understand you didn't follow his case?" Karen said, her voice soothing. "I couldn't stand to. The most I could do was look up the verdict and sentence after it was over." Jade's voice was stronger. "I did a little research and found a few things I think might help. Would you like to hear them?" Steve appreciated that she'd asked first, instead of just telling Jade details that would probably upset her. Jade looked at him, as if asking his opinion. "I trust her, sweetheart. If she thinks it'll help you, she's probably right." Jade turned back to the Amine. "Okay, I'd like to know." She sat up a little straighter, pulling away from Steve to sit up on her own. "In court it came out that his MO, you know what that means, right?" She waited for Jade's nod. "It was to come up behind a woman at night, away from other students, and hit her with a stun gun." "I heard that," Jade said, not understanding. "JV dear, do you know what that much electricity does to our systems?" Jade scowled. "No." "What?" "It kind of shorts out the magic that lets us change. That's what kept you from shifting. Depending on how strong the shock, it can last for weeks, even months, but it's not permanent." Jade sagged with relief. "What about my skin burning when I'm touched? Is that a side effect of getting zapped too?" Karen cringed. "That one's harder. I can't say for sure, but I think that was triggered by a combination of the physical and emotional trauma. Has it eased any since you got here?" "Rebecca wondered about that a few days ago, so we tested it. It's not as bad as it once was, but it's not gone by any means. I suspect it will vanish when you're totally secure, when you feel safe and no longer fear that your world is falling apart under you." "I feel safe. I have since I got here," Jade protested. "But you aren't totally secure, are you? You're afraid things won't work, you'll have to leave here and find somewhere else, aren't you?" Jade blushed. "Are you reading me?" "Only on the surface, dear," Karen said. "Yes, I'm an empath and I let it help me with my work, but I never push without permission. You've got good shields though, not much gets through unless you're really afraid." Steve frowned at Karen for not warning his mate before they started, then turned back to Jade. "I know it was hard, but you did it." She turned and smiled at him, her eyes a little less haunted than they'd been that morning. "I'd like to talk to you again if you think you can," Karen said. "I think I can do that," Jade agreed after a moment. "It would be easier for me if you could come to my office, but if you need me to, I can come back out here." Jade looked at him. "I'll take you," he said. "I'll come into the office," Jade turned back to Karen. "Good. How about Friday, day after tomorrow, at 3 o'clock? It's my last appointment for the day, and we can take as long as you need." She looked at Steve again as if to see if he could do that, and at his nod, turned back. "We'll be there." Karen stood. "I'll see you then, and over the weekend too. Rebecca called last week and invited us for dinner on Saturday. You'll get to meet my husband then." She looked down at the pair on the sofa, Steve still holding Jade close. "Will you be okay until Friday?" Jade looked up at her, surprise plain in her wide eyes, then lowered her gaze as she thought about it. "I think so, yes. If you need to talk, don't hesitate to call, day or night. Steve has my personal cell number." Jade nodded. "I mean it." Karen's voice turned stern. "If you need to, you call." "I will, I promise." Karen gave her another hard look and then nodded. "Don't worry about seeing me out. I'm going to stop at the main house and spend a few minutes with Rebecca before heading out." Once she closed the door, Steve turned and looked down at Jade. I know it was hard. How are you feeling? She was quiet for several minutes. Better, but I'm exhausted. Talking about it stirred everything up again. She sighed, but it helped to let it out. Do you want to go back up to the house for dinner or stay here and have a quiet evening? Maybe go to bed early. Staying here and crashing early sounds heavenly.